Today we're working on a 2002 Ford F-250 Super Duty with a 7.3 liter diesel in it, and what we're going to be working on today is going to be the oil cooler and of course making sure we have the gaskets to go with it. So we're going to show you a few tips and tricks on how to remove the old oil cooler and reinstall the new oil cooler using the tools that we have, and of course again the new gaskets, which is vital when you're working on a job like this. So we'll get started and show you some of the first steps of getting this process done. Before we can get started with the removal of the old oil cooler, there's a few steps we're going to have to take. We're going to have to drain the radiator fluid at the front of the engine on the driver's side. It's going to be at the bottom of the radiator. There's a drain valve there for you. Then we're also going to have to drain the oil, remove the oil filter, and then disconnect our block heater up here. Those will be the first steps involved in getting this part removed. So drain the oil, drain the coolant, and then we'll get on to the next steps. Now that we have our oil drained and our oil filter off, we're also going to have to drain the remainder of the antifreeze that's sitting at the block here. So just above where you pulled the oil filter off, you're going to find a plug right here. Make sure you have a catch pan ready because that's going to dump anywhere between 2.5, 3 gallons of antifreeze out. So have your catch pan ready to go. Pull that plug, let that antifreeze drain, and then you're on to the next steps, which are going to be removing the bolts from the oil filter housing. You have one up top here, and in the back we have one back here, and then a little bit further up, one back here. You'll want to keep that catch pan readily available because once you pull those bolts and break this oil filter housing free from its mount, you're going to have a little bit of antifreeze come out from there as well. So make sure that catch pan is ready, and you'll have all the antifreeze in one spot versus all over the floor. And then we can move on to the next steps. Now that we've got our 3 bolts loose, and we've gone ahead and let the rest of that radiator fluid, that antifreeze, drain out, we're just going to have to basically break the oil pump housing free from its base. We'll use a prybar. Just get right in behind it. Just give it a little bit of a tug. And there we go. And once we have the oil filter housing broken free, we can then go right up onto the oil cooler, press a couple times there, and then we should be able to just pull her right out. And there we have it. Once you have the old oil cooler removed along with the filter housing, you'll just take a pry bar. You'll notice that there's a line in the housing here. Get in between the notch of the oil cooler and that housing. You'll just gently budge. And you'll notice that the cooler will start sliding out. Once you have the oil cooler and oil filter housing off from the back side, you're going to come to the front side of the motor, and this is a little bit more difficult to get to, but if you remove your bottom radiator hose here, you'll be able to see the housing, which is right here. You have one bolt here. I've already broken that free so you can see. And then on the other side of that, there's another bolt. They're both going to be 10 millimeter. Once you remove those 2 bolts, you can pull that front side of the housing right out through this hole. That way we can get the new gasket on its mounting plate over here. Now that we have the whole oil cooler assembly removed, we can now begin installing the new oil cooler itself. Now before we can do that, we need to make sure that we clean up all of our mounting surfaces on both the oil cooler filter housing as well as the front housing of the oil cooler. And I will make this one note: when I removed both the oil filter housing and the front housing, the gaskets did not come with them. So I had to go back and remove those gaskets from their mounting area. Make sure you do that and make sure those gaskets do come off, because you don't want to have a situation where you double gasket. That's just a quick way for you to have a lot of leaks and a lot of problems coming up. So now that we have our new oil cooler, we've installed both our bottom and top O-rings on both sides. And the way we want to put these in after we've gotten everything cleaned up and ready for reinstallation, you don't want to put a lot of pressure on these housings. These are just soft aluminum. So we'll put our oil cooler in position, match it up with the notch here, along with our tab. And we're just going to smack that in with a rubber mallet, holding the actual housing itself. You don't want to put this on the floor or anywhere where it can get cracked. So you'll just slip the cooler itself into its spot, lining up the notch, and just give it a couple of light taps with that rubber mallet, and it'll pop right in for you. We now have the cooler back in place, and a little tip I learned, it's actually a lot easier just to reinstall the front mount first, get that gasket in place and those bolts down, and then we can just take the oil cooler and slide it through, and when we get it to meet up to that front mount, we'll take this pry bar and go in between the cooler and the exhaust, and that'll actually slip it right into place, right there at the front mount. Now, be sure you make sure you get your new gasket installed, and you want to make sure that that goes over the heater coil first. Then you can get that lined up with the bolt holes, get your bolts put back in place, get those torqued down, and it's actually a very easy install once you get those few things taken care of. All we like now is reinstalling our heater plug, getting our antifreeze plug put back in up here where we drain the rest of that antifreeze. Then we'll go ahead and fill up the oil filter, put a new oil filter on, refill that antifreeze, and then we'll just check for leaks and make sure that everything's sealed up nice and tight. And after that, we've done the oil cooler on this truck. And hopefully now you have a better understanding of what it does take to get the oil cooler taken care of and taken out, reinstalled, and having this truck back up and running in no time.